Hi, everybody. This is Testing Minutes podcast about software testing, brief and straight to the point. Your host, as always, is me, Alexander Romanov, software engineer and test in IOHK.
It's me, Artem and Key Coach.
Yeah, and today we have a very special guest in our podcast, Mark Winteringham. Hi, Mark.
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
That's great that you here with us. And for those of our listeners who don't know about Mark, Mark is very known in testing community for his first. I just discovered his book. It's called Testing Web APIs. It's really incredible book because it actually it's the first book on my mind that teaches you how to how to add or how to use exploratory testing with testing APIs. So of course we can use exploratory testing with almost any kind of testing, but that was like the first real example, and that the things that works. And actually, I started to use it in my daily work. And beside that, Mark is an creator of the courses of automation testing, and recently he wrote and created another very interesting book. It's called Software Testing with Generative AI. It's a very hot topic. So today, I really excited to talk about your experiences, Mark, in software testing with AI.
Sure, yeah, happy to get into it. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So the first and obvious question is, what what was your motivation on creating this book and exploring the AI in software testing application?
So yeah, it's a funny story how I came about writing this book. So as you mentioned, my first book, Testing Web APIs. When I started writing that, I'd been teaching API testing for a good 5 years before that. So I knew what I wanted to cover. Like I had that book in my head. I knew all the different aspects of it. But once I'd finished it, I knew I wanted to write something else. And I actually was going to write a second book about API testing. But I went back to my publisher. I showed them the idea for my second book, and they were like, "No, this is a terrible idea. But you should do something on generative AI." And it was about, I think the conversation started about 6 months after ChatGPT 3.5 or 3 at the time had landed. So there was a lot of conversations around what was going on there. I've always been really interested in AI, from, not just generative AI, but sort of kind of the whole sort of spectrum of it, the ramifications it has for us working in testing, the ramifications it has for us as a society and as a species as well. So as soon as that was mentioned, I was really interested in this. And, you alluded to the fact that I used to do a lot of teaching in the automation in testing space with Richard Bradshaw. So I felt like what I'd learned from that space about talking about automation as a means to enhance testing, to support testing, I thought that mindset going into the generative AI space would work really well. And that's exactly what happened. And basically it just gave me, an opportunity to spend a year really digging into generative AI, how it works. I was fortunate to speak to a lot of people who work in that space, testing tool providers, people who are testing these types of tools and stuff. So it offered a real journey for me as well, which I hope sort of is reflected in the book for other readers.
Oh, cool. And actually, we already talking about some terms, but in our podcast, we have like tradition to tell our listeners about this kind of terms. And can you describe what is AI or generative AI in your own words? How you describe it? What is it?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to be doing as well, because when we talk about AI at the moment, we tend to kind of mean generative AI. And it's like the equivalent, I've said this before in the past, like it's the equivalent of going to a geneticist and going, oh, you're doing biology. It's like, yes, but, within the wider thing. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about the building of machines that can learn by themselves to solve problems through algorithms and basically through via computer systems that can basically observe and translate that observation into new learnings to take further steps forward. And then within that, we have lots and lots of different subfields. When we're talking about generative AI, we're talking about a very specific field within artificial intelligence that is focused on the space of generative work. So, there are other types of AI which are known as discriminative. So, you hear examples of things like AI that's used spam bot filters or AI that uses targeted ads. They tend to be discriminatory. So they, not as in discrimination in a negative way, but in a they have been taught to take some information in and make a prediction or decision out of it. Whereas obviously with generative stuff, what we're doing is we're working with AI that has been trained on large corpuses of data. For me, I tend to explore the space of sort of text-based generation. So, getting into things like natural language processing. But also it could be trained on images, audio, that sort of thing. And the idea is that a model is trained on all of this material to basically become kind of a predictor. So you will send it some sort of prompt, maybe text, maybe an image or audio. It will be processed by this model, and this model will basically predict an output that is the output that we want to see, the most sort of maximally valuable response that we want from the input that we've given in. So yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of, in my mind, I always sort of think of generative AI as quite sort of expansive and open, because the input that you're putting in can open up possibilities or open up the kind of response, whereas the discriminative stuff is more about narrowing in, which both are valid.
So this is like a huge field, and what we see like in recent years. So it starts with some kind of like the first. I can remember that it was first generative AI. It's ChatGPT, but after that, a lot of other companies have created their own versions. And the question is, when you created or when you explore this field, have you compared different generative AIs? What are the best ones, or the most suitable, or like the worst?
So so this is a tricky thing to answer because we are recording like the 13th of December 2024. Who knows what happens next week? Like literally
Yes.
15 minutes before I jumped on this call, Gemini 2 has just come out. At the moment, Gemini is not considered very good for like things like code-based stuff. Whereas, you don't know what's going to happen with the next models. So I think, different models have different characteristics because either the data that they're tuned on or the way that they are, they have what's known as a system prompt. So a system prompt is a set of instructions that you send to a model before the conversation, like ChatGPT saying, don't say anything rude. Like ChatGPT is known for like, don't be political, that sort of kind of thing. So all of those things will have an impact. In my experience, or like from my experience of sort of conversations that were happening, most people tend to speak most highly of Claude, which is Anthropic's model. They feel that that's better with code-based problems. The GPT models, so ChatGPT is a fine-tuned version of a GPT model, but GPT models are also used for things like GitHub Copilot. They work quite well in that Copilot assistant sort of space. But I think also we need to keep in mind that it's not just the model itself, but kind of the infrastructure around it. So another reason why Anthropic is probably seen as more popular at the moment is because it just has a better user interface. It's doing things with, so for example, you have a conversation with it and I'm saying, hey, can you write me some unit tests for X, Y, and Z? It will actually break out the code that it recommends into its own distinct section in the user interface, and I can copy that stuff through. And that's non-trivial things to keep in mind. You know, if we're using these tools, if we're going to use these tools on a daily basis, the experience of utilizing them is just as important as the quality of the model. The thing is, everything is such flux. You know, who knows? Who knows what might happen? You know, next week, next month, we will start to see stuff. There's also arguments as well that rather than having generalized models, it's better to have more specified models, and we see this in OpenAI do this with ChatGPT. You can speak, and I use that with quotations for those who are not watching and listening, because they're not human. But you can have different types of models with different types of system prompts, and different connections to things. So there's like one I've been using lately is a TypeScript GPT. Mm-hmm. So it's tuned more towards helping you with TypeScript problems. It's really useful for that. Another one, Scikit-learn, I think it's called, for research material. And then that integrates with different websites and will bring you back research material as well. So Martin Hinier's just written I think he's written 3 blog posts about all this. I recommend tracking that down. Maybe I could send you a link and put it in the show notes. Mm-hmm. But he's done a really interesting up-to-date exploration as of now. I've got something in the book, but the thing is I wrote that 6 months ago and things have tweaked and changed already. So there's always that kind of challenge. But ultimately, you just got to experiment. Mm-hmm. You got to try out yourself, see what works for you. I quite like ChatGPT. I don't know why. I tend to stick with that one, even though I am aware that it's probably not the best at the moment, especially in the engineering space. But I think it's because it's familiar to me and it responds, like the way that I craft my responses and my prompts. Mm-hmm. It works for me.
Cool. Actually, I think we can just narrow it down with more specific things, and let's talk about the software testing, right? How can we use the AI for software testing? What kind of task can help us with in our job?
So in the book, I propose a model which I call the area of effect model. And this is, whether you're using AI or you're using, traditional automation, we're always thinking about tools to kind of enhance and extend our abilities. So the area of effect model that I created is us in the center. So we have our abilities. So we have strong heuristic skills. We're good at planning. We're good at observing, decision making. And then AI is very good at things like transforming stuff, generating new material within a sort of bounded space. It's good at sort of sentiment analysis or sort of reviewing things for us. And it's the combination of those two things. We use those abilities of an LLM or of generative AI to extend what we can do. Now, the reason why I mention this is because I believe that we can use AI anywhere within the continuous testing model. And I find it really interesting that most of the conversations have been focused on test cases and automation. I'm writing a blog at the moment because someone was asking about how it might work in shift left testing, for example. How can something like that be useful in a context where you're having conversations? And there are lots of ways. Like, for example, you can use it to improve your own, what's known as intrinsic testability, your own knowledge of the problem space. So you can use it to educate yourself about certain architecture principles or how code works in a certain way, or what is meant by queue-based systems or something like that. We can also use it to say, this is our proposed scenarios. Have we considered everything? Like, based on these risks and these quality characteristics, can you propose any other ideas that we've have? The key thing is it brings it back to us. So we use these to kind of cast out like ideas or cast out the work that we want done. We get a response back, and then we are the judges. So it's sometimes known as being the human in the loop. We evaluate what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. We determine what we're going to use and what we're not going to use, and where we want to take it. So with that mindset, yeah, I feel like so I work as a quality engineer, so we focus on continuous testing. I think there's opportunities across that whole sort of kind of continuous testing loop. The trick is having the ability to identify those tasks, because I'm not saying that we use it 100% in each of those spaces, because if there's no human in the loop, then we're just basically relying on a model that is, it is basically a predictor. It doesn't think, it doesn't have instincts per se. It is literally a bunch of probabilities, and we are interacting with it to get those probabilities to nudge to a point where we get a valuable response. But if we pick out small individual tasks, I think that we can utilize AI to help us speed up those tasks, so that we can do more, or either move faster or expand out the work that we do.
Yeah. And actually, I want to add a little bit to the topic that some people just tend to accept whatever the models returns, and this where we for sure must to use our critical thinking. That is not everything that is responded by model from AI tool is like the truth, and we don't need for sure use it as source of truth, how most, like not most, but a lot of people think. So, and I like that you mentioned that we are in the center and we should decide what is good, not what we are going to use or not going to use in our specific task. And it doesn't matter what kind of task we are going to work or working right now. So we are deciders, and we should make a decision about, are we using this or not this. And actually, I like to use the generative AI and actually any kind of AI tool to generate ideas, because in our world there's so many information, and obviously I can't keep in mind everything I ever can use or could use in my job. So sometimes I just give me some ideas here, and then okay, I forgot about this one. Like it's some kind of note for me, especially as for now, this model, when you continuously using them, they understand what you want and understand the way you think and all of these things. So they return you the better result.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that's rooted in mindset. The second model that's in the book is all about the whole book is structured around three principles: mindset, technique, and context. And I think mindset is the important place to start with, which is, like you say, appreciating that they are useful, but they are flawed. Having a healthy skepticism of what's coming, what's going in, and what's coming out as well. I think also as well, it's rooted in testing, like understanding the capabilities and the purpose of testing as well. If we understand that it's not all about validation and verification, and that we're in the information game, we are in the business of trying to find out as much about what's going on in a product, about our context, our problems, and trying to help and shine a light on those sort of areas that we don't know. I think understanding that, and then understanding that these models can help in those aspects, but not necessarily overly trusting them, that works really well. There's another aspect as well, which is I think sometimes one of the dangers we have is if we ask a question but we don't know what the answer is from a model, because then how do you determine if what you're getting is the right response? And going back to that example I gave earlier, which was I can use a model to teach me what queue-based systems are. But if I don't know what they are in the first place, how can I validate that that's true? So that's where you're like, I've used this model to get me to a certain degree. Now I'm going to go seek other sources of information. Or I have a clear idea. I have a task that is small enough that I understand roughly what good is going to look like, so that when I get a response back, I can look and go, this is not what I wanted, or this is what I wanted. A good example is, I've generated a unit test. Okay, the unit test passes, but it's 60 lines long. My internal heuristic says, oh God, no, no, this isn't right. So it's those sort of situations. So that's all rooted in the mindset aspect of, having healthy skepticism, being critical of the responses, but not being so critical that you refuse to use them, because they can be useful in certain places. And when they're not, there's other tools. I see examples of people going, oh, it doesn't work as a very good calculator. Use a calculator. It's that sort of situation. And that's why we can apply it to all tools. It's all that mindset towards tools, picking the right thing for the right job.
Yeah, I completely agree that. So what I noticed, that some of the versions of, like, some different LLM systems are providing the not only the answer that you then need to verify whether it is correct or not, but it provides the sources based, so the answer is based, so you can go and check by yourself. And in that case, it's a little bit it becomes a little bit similar to any search that we are using, like Google or anything like that. So when we are talking about, or when we are searching something in this search engine, we get the information, but to check if it's correct, we are searching for something more.
Yeah,
And another approach that I also noticed, I don't know about how it's called. So there is an IDE, maybe it's called Cursive or something, and
cursor.
yeah, Cursive.
Hmm.
And here, the approach is, inside of your IDE, you can plug a multiple of LLM models, and then you can compare the output between models. I use it mostly for writing code, but then you can compare what is the best answer for your context. And actually, the context also matters, because first of all, the better you will explain to this LLM system, to the machine, what you want to have or what you expect, so the better conditions you set, the better the answer will be. So when the question is too broad, then it starts to just throwing random facts to you, and you need to filter it out,
Yeah,
and you need to spend a lot of time to do it. But
yeah.
with correct conditions, it works pretty well.
It's a garbage in, garbage out situation. And that's why, like, the third part of the model is I call out context, because you could write the greatest, like, neatest, beautiful prompt that you've ever created, but if you don't give any information about the situation that you're in or the problem that you're trying to solve, then it's going to struggle. So it's the distinction between saying, write me a unit test or write me an end-to-end test for a login form, versus write me an end-to-end test for a login form. Here's the HTML for the login form. You're going to get a better output from that second one than the first one. And again, that's where the tasking comes in, because if you find that the context that you want to put in is too large, then you need to break it up into smaller chunks. So yeah, I do think that context is massively important, and that's where, like, tools like retrieval augmented generation come in, and fine tuning can come in, and system prompts come in, because you can bake some of that context into the initial conversation or the initial prompts, so that when you continue down that line, you've kind of got some of those sort of guardrails in place, so that you get a more optimal response. And then, like you say, yeah, like the use of different models, I think is really interesting. That's happening a lot more. People are, in some ways, I think this is useful. In some ways, I think it's dangerous because they're not that wildly different from one another. So if you get a response from one model and then take it to another model and go, "What do you think?" You'll get a different output. But it doesn't necessarily mean you've got the right answer. Like, I think you still have to sometimes get external validation outside of this ecosystem. It's easier for us in engineering sometimes because, like, when we're using it for code is very bound to its syntax, to its rules. So we get that instant feedback of if we put something in, it doesn't compile, or it compiles but you get an error because something's not been imported or not been referenced correctly. But if we want to use this beyond that space, we have to be more careful. And I think, like, things like the shift left stuff, very interesting, very useful. I think it's really powerful in exploratory testing as well. The recommendations, the suggestions we get are really useful, but it's harder for us to sort of qualify whether something is good or not. So we have to be a little bit more on the ball those times.
Yeah, and actually, I want to return regarding the context. Like a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking about how to use generative AI for different stuff, and for example, creating test cases or test ideas or anything like this. Maybe like test strategy, doesn't matter. And I was thinking about that you can never achieve giving the AI 100% of the context you are in. And this is the because of this, the results and the output from different models will be like pretty wide, and it's harder to understand, is it really good or is it not. And that we come which we already talked, that you always need to judge, is it really good and for your task or not. But the main thing here is, like, you never came with 100% of context for LLM model, because there are so many things around you, starting from the people you work, the processes you're in, the culture you're in, the processes, the tools, that anything.
Yeah. So Rob Meany and Ash Winter's 10 Ps of testability is really good for that, to kind of define, like, to understand all the different complexities of your context. Because you're absolutely right. Like, LLM or no LLM, it is impossible for ourselves to fully understand it, because even if we get all the information, it's still filtered through our perspective, which it's getting very metatextual, but there we go. So we have that challenge. Then we want to distill that. Then we have technical issues. So, like you say, we can't put everything in because context windows become important. So context window, different to context. So we talked about context in the sort of the culture and the environment we're in. In the world of large language models, context means the amount of words or tokens or data you can put into a prompt. And these are limited, because anything over, it either gets too expensive in the hardware world to process it, or it just becomes so bad at performing. There's that problem. Then you have things like Gemini. So 1.5 has like 1 million token context, so you could put a book in. But then you run into other issues. So you run into issues around recency bias. So the stuff that's at the top of your prompt is more likely to be sort of considered than the stuff at the bottom of your prompt. And then also there's the needle in a haystack. If you provide everything and then you're like, solve this specific problem, here's all the information. You imagine someone saying, I need you to make me a cup of coffee, but first let me explain where everything in the house is. So I don't need that. I just need to know where the coffee mug is, the coffee, and the coffee making machine. So we have that issue as well. And then finally as well is planning. So, this is evolving, and there is different research has different opinions on this, but generally they're not very good at planning. So if you give it all of its context and say, plan me a solution out, it's not going to be super great at that. And this goes back to this area of effect model of, I'm good at planning, so let me work out the plan, and then let me dip in and dip out, capture bits of the context here, capture bits of the context there, utilize them along the plan. And that sort of kind of assistant, cyborg, whatever relationship you want to call it, tends to be more effective.
Yeah, and if you just continue to talking about application of the LLM models in software testing, so you just mentioned that we can use it for generating unit tests or generating any kind of other automated tests. But what else can we do in automation with these systems?
So I tend to come from the approach where, like, most of the examples I see shared are building the whole test and everything with it. Again, this is a really good example of task analysis or task breakdown of the building of a unit of a automated test. So, we need to get data from somewhere. We need to set up our framework. We need to trigger the test running. We need to interact with the system. We need to code like some sort of oracle or assertion in it. There's lots of different little things that we do. Again, I prefer to use these models to help me with specific tasks. So rather than generate something like for me, I may build the test, but I will use the generative AI to build me my page objects, for example. I can build a prompt that says, I'm about to send you some HTML. I need you to turn this into a page object. I'm using Java and the page object factory. Please make sure you add these annotations in. Here's the code. And it translates that HTML with the, usually with the right selectors. And then I'll do little bits of cleanup and stuff. And I find that works better than just generate me an end-to-end test or a unit test. So again, breaking down those small tasks to help me solve those specific problems. Now, you can do that in two ways. You can do that either with tools like Copilot. So Copilot, you sit there with all of your files open on your IDE, and it's looking at what you're trying to achieve, and it will recommend things that way. Or you can do bigger tasks, and you use something like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, where you're like, this is a specific task, and here's some data that I need to translate. And I find that speeds me up. That's more effective than generating something that I end up putting into my IDE, running, it fails, and then I have to tweak it, because maintaining tests is much harder than writing tests, I find, in terms of like cognitive load. So I would rather build it up with the LLM at my side to help me at specific points rather than generate the whole thing and have to sort of do cleanup and fixing afterwards.
Yeah, so it just reminded me actually the approach that you taught on your courses and on the different public talks. It's using not automated testing, but automation in testing. So we have testing as a process, and we are using automation in some parts or points, not everywhere, where it is applicable. So it is the same like using generative AI in something, in automation, in testing, in something else. So not using it instead of testing. So for you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's like AI in testing, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Tested AI or something like that. I don't know.
Exactly.
And another question, if you are just continuing to talk about using AI in different aspects, especially like not only like testing itself. So what other applications can you imagine or can you propose on, for example, using it for even management tasks or for DevOps tasks or something not directly connected to the code itself? Because for the code we can do it or we can change it, but for something that is considered soft skills.
So, yeah, interesting. I mean, talking about sort of kind of DevOps stuff, I recently had a dinner with a company called Devon, and Sean McGurr, who's like the CAIO guy. He's a data scientist and stuff, and he was telling me a lot about actually how you can almost use these tools as a platform to put data in and get predictions out. And his argument was you don't need to train sort of traditional neural networks. You remember I said right near the start about discriminative AI, you don't need to build them. You can put your data into one of these things and say, map out some trends for me. It's not something I've tried myself, but I think that's kind of interesting that there's, we use it to generate new things that we need generated as we're going. But to use it as like a prediction model, I think it's quite interesting. It's not something I've really explored so much. And I think obviously there's some dangers around, like, how do you know what it's predicting is actually accurate? Because it's kind of turtles all the way down. It's like you're using an AI to pretend to be a different AI. It's very well. I think in the soft skills space, I tend probably not to use it. So I try and distinguish tasks from. So I'm very much influenced by a book called The Glass Cage by Nicholas Carr, and it's been around for like 15 years, this book, and it talks about the use of automation in lots of industries and the impact it has on us and the way we approach it. And he talks a lot about the idea of there being heuristic-based problems and algorithmic-based problems. So yeah, a lot of the things that we've talked about so far are probably more in the algorithmic space. They have distinct steps. They can be mapped out explicitly. It's not to say that they're not complicated or time-consuming to do, but they are well-defined. Heuristic-based stuff is trickier because it's more innate in us. It's harder to define, like how it's like, how do you explain riding a bike? It's that sort of tacit, implicit sort of kind of knowledge and skills and stuff like that. And I find a lot of the more soft skill stuff sits within that space. In my mind, soft skills are more about sort of the influencing, the communication, the observing of what's going on. It's that sort of gelling people together. That said, again, there will be frameworks and tools that we can use around this sort of stuff. So my team at the moment, we're using a process called popcorn flow. So popcorn flow is great for developing habits, enacting change, all of stuff which is kind of heuristic-y, sort of squishy sort of stuff. It's hard to do, but I can still use LLMs to help me manage the process. I could still use LLMs to generate all of the necessary comms around how this kind of flow works. So, within these frameworks of change, these frameworks of influence, who doesn't use a spell checker to check an important email before we sent it out? We're utilizing AI in that space. Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately there's like a sliding scale. If the task is more heuristic driven, then I'm probably going to use it less than if it's more algorithmic. And I think the argument is that, if we can utilize these tools effectively, then that gives more space, more bandwidth to have, valuable conversations, healthy sort of targeted conversations and things like that.
Yeah. Actually, I just thought about, because for now you can use this AI with like voice conversation. So as a manager, I would just imagine how I use AI for learning how to provide the feedback for colleagues, so the model can respond me in this way, and I would think it would be interesting.
So a good example there might be that you have a bunch of transcripts of conversations, and you could maybe use an LLM to say, like, look through these. What are the main themes that that come up through these conversations? What are the main things that this person is hoping to achieve? What are their goals? Because that could be really, like, doing goals and performance review stuff can be quite difficult. but really getting down into the sort of the nitty gritty, like the details of it, you still need to have that conversation. So you could, there is that small slice of algorithmic. I've got to analyze the conversations, the context and stuff. But you could get something out of that quite quickly, which is important because, like how many people do you manage, Artem?
It depends on different companies. Right now, I'm just as freelancer, more in consulting stuff.
Okay.
But I used to manage from till 25, around 25.
Yeah, so you're doing that conversation 25 times. That can speed you up so you can have better conversations in those one-to-ones and things like that. So it's that knack of, and that focus on where these can be utilized in specific points rather than, shove it all into like some sort of performance review AI bot that goes, congratulations, I think these are your goals for you. They've been set up. You have 6 months to achieve them, which is probably, gonna involve someone leaving at some point or something like that. So yeah, it's that combination of those two things again.
Yeah, and I can add one case from my personal experience on using AI. So one of the examples on how we can use it, it's for learning new things, and that's an interesting case. It can become an interesting when you are, for example, when you're learning a new programming language. It's like very algorithmic, but then if you have a task, some coding task, and you want to solve it, then for example Copilot, if it's in your IDE, then it did not help you with thinking, so it just provides an exact answer to your problem. So you're just typing and it just provides auto completion. So you need um, explicitly turn it off and just concentrate on learning, because if you will rely only on auto completion, and before that, like for years we had auto completion of the methods, but right now we have auto completion of the exact like solutions or a part of solutions. So we need to turn it off just to make sure that we are actually learning, because
Yeah.
other than that we get used to auto completions, and but we will not be able to write a real code without it. And the same goes, for example, with any kind. So there is some system. It's called a napkin AI, where you can provide a text and it recognizes the text, and it will throw you the diagram of this text, like the main ideas. It summarizes. So it's like for example, for presentations, it's really nice thing. But if you are talking about learning, then if it just provides you a diagram, then you are not learning at all, because the essence of making conclusions and essence of learning stuff is just that you need to come up with these simplified diagrams or schemas by yourself. Then there is a learning. But if you will extract this part, then you will just do like, here is a text, then this part is magic, then you get a diagram, and you can't actually as you mentioned, you can't judge if it's right or wrong, because it's just
Yeah.
text. You just see that this text is okay, it's a little bit like uh, similar to the text, so maybe it is correct, but you can't judge it completely.
You're absolutely right, and that's not just applicable to AI, but all tools. So again, mentioning glass cage, like GPS is a really good example of that, of how GPS has had an impact on. For example, I think I remember reading that native Inuits, younger generations are more likely to have accidents because they rely on GPS more to take them around sort of dangerous terrain, whereas like the older generations have learnt where to go and what not to. And also how like GPS has the ability to impact our memory, because our memory, the way that it works is we anchor things and then connect those anchors together. And if you've got a GPS that's just telling you where to go, you don't develop those skills strongly about anchoring and connecting. So that, yeah, there's always that trade-off when using any kind of automation. And I think it's an important thing to sort of to highlight, which is, like, just because we can use these tools, there are times when the pressure's on and we have to deliver, but there are other times when we want to be spending time understanding the problem more deeply. So because, it can have the knock-on effect of, like you say, if we get to a point where we don't understand what we're building because we've got some tool to build it, how can we evaluate what an optimal response looks like? And it kind of snowballs there. There's like a flywheel of kind of drift from the context. You're sort of moving further and further away from it. Yeah, it's a good point to make.
Yeah, and I think these all conversations brings us to the main question that any modern software tester like asking every day, I think, is whether AI will replace software testers or not. This is like I think that this is not the first time that you are asked
No,
this
no.
question. Yeah, but what from your opinion, what
My
is
feeling is if AI can replace testers and quality engineers, like truly replace us, we've got bigger problems than our jobs. Because we are such generalists in what we do. We are engineers, developers, therapists, counselors, authors, writers. We draw from psychologists. We draw from so many different talents. I do think that we're in a unique position that our role is very much it is generalized. So, if it is generalized, if we have a model that's generalized enough to succeed as testers, like good testing, not just test cases and test scripts, then we probably are getting quite close to sort of AGI sort of space. I think we're already using AI. We've already been using AI for the last 10 years in our work. I still remember the day when someone showed me how Applitools worked, and that was 2014, I think.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
All that sort of stuff it's existed. Self-healing algorithms within end-to-end testing tools. What we're seeing is just that one, it's becoming easier to interact directly with the AI. And they are becoming generalized relative to what they were, that we can leverage them and use them in different spaces. I think things will change. That's why I wrote the book, because I do believe things will change, but also I want people to think about it, like I said, with that healthy skepticism, with that idea of utilizing it across the continuous testing model, rather than just focusing on, we've got a model that can generate a bunch of test scripts for us. Right, let's sack all our testers in our QE. Oh, great, fantastic. Okay, let us know when things fall over. Also, there's the argument that there may be more work for us because, as you were demonstrating earlier, if people are just using Copilot or other tools to just generate code, this code's probably been trained on not necessarily all of the best practices. So it's going to, for example, if everything's been, let's say, like a certain library is utilized in a certain way and everybody's used it the same way. So this model gets trained on this utilization. And then we find out that this way of doing things has a massive security flaw. Like, let's say, heartbeat level, SSH sort of level of flaw.
Yeah.
Well, the model's still trained to do that. And not everyone's going to be aware of that. So they'll keep implementing it and stuff. So I think there's going to be more work for us. There's going to be more challenges ahead. And then, like the final part is, and I find this quite amusing, of all these testing tools that are like, we've got these tools that can generate test scripts for you. But if everyone starts building like generative AI backed products, which are indeterministic, test scripts don't work in that space. So now you've got this product that generates a bunch of stuff that you can't use for your project. So, we've got all those challenges. Like, how do we test non-deterministic systems in a way that's, useful, is high in quality, that is safe? We've got all of that to kind of learn and face, and it's only going to scale up. So yeah, I don't see the future of testing impacted at all.
Yeah. As I love to mention, we will not be replaced by AI, but for sure our work will be transformed in terms of using different kind of tools and different technologies that will arise. Because uh, even let's get back 2 years when it started, like no one thing, what's going wrong is something new, and for now it's like everywhere, and it changed like really fast, really rapid, and I think it will go even faster from next year. I think in 3 years, maybe we will listen this podcast and think, "Oh, what we were talking about? It's something already old stuff. We need to think about something new."
Yeah, like going back to what I was mentioning earlier, like Gemini 2.0 has just come out, and their big focus is agents and AI agents. Now, the idea being is that we have the models, we have like the way I sort of sometimes think of it is like an unconscious soup. It's that part of the brain. It doesn't think, it's not like us and stuff. But I think that the closest analogy I have is like the unconscious thinking, the system one thinking to these things. And now what's starting to appear is more effective ways to build better agents that utilize this stuff. So we've got the foundation. There's a reason why they're called foundational models. We have that foundation there, and it's the tech that's going to be built on top of it. It's like, when cloud first came out, initially it was just, oh, we've got the ability to put our stuff on someone else's server really easily. And then all these, the explosion of tools that came on top of that, and things like Docker and Kubernetes and all of the different ways in which, like Lambdas and like different types of databases and things like that, all that technology sat on that cloud infrastructure. I think that's what we will see is, things like agents and the way in which they can connect to each other as well. I see that Angie Jones has been sharing some stuff around standards about how we connect to models as well. So an agent could divert and use different models and stuff. All of that complexity is things that we are going to have to face in the near future. And I think it's going to be, it's interesting, but it's also really exciting.
Yeah, and generally speaking, all the new technologies will. So at first, it will feel like magic, but then when you're using it more and more, you will start to notice a lot of problems. And for example, if you're, I think it was hype maybe a year ago or something, there were a set of tools or a set of projects that offer an ability to just explain in the words what application do you want, and then it builds it for you entirely. But
Hmm.
this thing, it feels like magic, but it will, like in most cases, it will build you something that was already built, and it will not be very efficient in tweaking and changing it over time. And if you are talking like more generally on how the software process is, so the creation of new things is only like 10 or 15% of, or 20% of the whole flow. And then you got the production, and you need to continuously change the software, maintain it. And so at some point, as you mentioned, Mark, so yeah, it will be better. For example, like recognizing something that needs to be patched. So we had these libraries, or yeah, the libraries that checked whether the packages are outdated or not. It's automatically, it just notifies you. It can even patch it for you automatically. You just need to press a button. But you right now we don't have this AI that will change it for you, that it will have all of your context, and that can replace all of the testers. So we have time, and I think we will have a lot of time,
Yeah.
because errors are everywhere, basically. And
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
no systems without errors.
And this is why I wrote my book. Like, this is why I recommend people to read it, because I don't see this. I think what I've written, I don't see it as the conclusion, or I see it as the start. And what I hope is it will inspire people not just to use these tools in successful and safe ways, but also, yeah, help sort of trigger new ideas and, contribute to that sort of kind of evolution of what we're going to look like in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. And actually, we can talk about, you already mentioned about your book about software testing with generative AI. If there are any listeners right now or viewers of our podcast want to learn more about generative AI or anything that may help them in testing careers, um, can you mention what they can learn to or read or watch, maybe some courses, books?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, for the generative AI space, yeah, my book is available on Amazon and Manning.com and all good bookstores. Right, that's the sales pitch done. Things I
Yeah.
found useful is the models themselves. I've been quite open with the fact that I actually used AI to teach me certain aspects and certain context bits and stuff that I fed into the book. For example, like, I had to learn about vector embeddings to understand how retrieval augmented generation works and how these models are working. Again, I've validated it elsewhere and stuff, but you can use these. You can use models to kind of get yourself up to speed with certain things. Deeplearning.ai is really good. We didn't really talk a lot about kind of the technique sort of space, but like, prompt engineering is massively important in terms of how we build these prompts and how we utilize certain patterns to maximize output. And I learned a lot from Deep Learning AI. And I think what's interesting with that site is not only are they sort of teaching sort of foundational stuff, but they're exposing people to new and exciting things that are happening in this space through like these small short courses and stuff. So it's like one on LLMs as an operating system that I recently watched that was really fascinating to sort of kind of learn. And then beyond, I'd say Ministry of Testing, being that was my home for 5 years. I would there's lots of great material on there. I've written a bunch of automation courses on there, and there's a lot of stuff for foundational, for people looking to get in. And the community there is really good. And yeah, that'd be my most. The big thing as well is kind of getting involved with local communities and having conversations and stuff like that. I think that's where a lot of my own personal learning comes from.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for a lot of materials. We will mention all of them in the like the
Notes.
captions and in the comments. And also, what I want to add, on the Ministry of Testing website, there is like a page or material. It's called 30 Days in AI in Testing. It's a compilation of materials for every day for like 30 days that gradually teaches you and walk through the like the space and this like so you can just have an initial idea on what it is and how it can be used, like a collection of
Yep.
videos, resources, blog posts, and so on. So
Yeah,
it's
and
also great. Yeah.
it's compiled with the help of Bill Matthews, who's doing, like, he's sharing a load of stuff around more of the how do we test AI, how do we be responsible for the quality of AI stuff. So if you want to learn more about that, he's the guy to check out. And I mentioned Martin Nino as well. He's done some stuff as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot. I think that's it. So we will just wrapping up our today's episode. we learned a lot. So first of all, we learned that the context matters, mindset matters, and technology that also matters. But the first two things are like the first one, and yeah. So just use AI and these LLM systems very like at points, not in everywhere, but at points that can improve your work, not just throwing some things on it and expecting it will do the magic for you. Uh, I want to thank a lot, Mark, for coming to our podcast. That was really, really insightful conversation. And yeah, I think we are. I will check your book, of course, and we are expecting for new books, maybe for testing web APIs 2.0 or something even more interesting.
We'll see. I've got a few things lined up, so hopefully I'll have something to share next year.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good,
And
good.
also, I want to thank all the viewers and listeners that stay with us for this hour in our podcast. And if you didn't subscribe yet, you can hit that button and also uh, this ring bell to have a notification about future episode. And maybe just write down how do you utilize the generative AI in your daily task in the comment, so we can learn more about possibilities for us also and learn from your comments as well.
Yeah,
And I think that's it. Thank
yeah,
you and
thanks.
see you in next episodes. Bye.
Yeah, bye.